In that moment, Ayla felt like the world around her was spinning. The drink he drank had poison in it. Furthermore, it was her precious father who fed her poison. Because? She couldn't believe the event unfolding before her. And he pronounced his own name. Am I Ayla? Ayla, Roderick and Ophelia's illegitimate daughter who was lost a decade ago, that Ayla well. I was worried you weren't Roderick's daughter. You are as stupid as your father. Every time I looked at you, it made me sick. Those blue eyes, like your father's. Your hair, a split image of my Ophelia, was the only redeeming feature. Incredible stories began to come out of Byron's mouth. She had believed him her entire life. He lived solely for the sake of his father. Even murdered by her father. However, who she thought was her father, wasn't her father. The person he killed was his biological father. Ayla wanted to grab Roderick and ask him if what Byron said was true, but there was no way the dead man would answer. Ayla. Thank you. I thank you. Thanks to you my revenge against your father was perfectly executed. Kidnapping you, raising you as my daughter and making you kill your biological father with your bare hands, that was my revenge plan against your father. It wasn't easy to accept, but unless everything Byron said was true, there was no reason for her to die like this. Once again, a nauseating stream of blood gushed from his throat. She felt angry and resentful. The reason why he was vomiting blood like this was probably because he drank poison, but even if that wasn't the case, he felt like he was going to tear out his chest and vomit blood at any moment. Killing you on the same day as your father is my last act of kindness. It may or may not be comforting, but you don't have to worry about your mother. My Ophelia will be happy by my side. Byron's laugh rang out in anguish. He tried to get up, but eventually his legs gave way. Ayla Dialing Weishafen lay next to her father, Roderick. It was brutal. More tormenting than death itself was the fact that she had been deceived her entire life. She felt unfair, angry. The man who laughed and smiled was a demon. There could be no other explanation. Even dead, she wouldn't forgive that demon. Ayla swore to curse him, even if it meant remaining a vengeful spirit. The price paid for deceiving and using her would be exacted in blood. As he made this resolution, he breathed his last. Ayla. Someone's voice called out her name and a figure ran towards her. Her blurry vision made it difficult to recognize her at first, but it soon became clear. His mother. The mother he had vaguely desired all his life without knowing her real name. It was Ophelia. Tears welled in Ophelia's loving violet eyes, and that was the last thing Ayla saw before she breathed her last. Ayla Dialing Weishafen died. She should have died. Betrayed by a man she had believed in her entire life, she had killed her own biological father with her own hands. And she, who had ceased to be useful, had also been poisoned by that man. Pain, as if your throat was being torn. The agony of every vein in his body being torn apart. Those sensations remained alive in his memory. But why? Why was she alive? Why was he breathing? He didn't even feel any pain. The poison had stolen her life, and yet how could she be alive without a single side effect? He sat up abruptly, gasping for breath. It seemed like a nightmare, a terrible dream. She raised her body sharply, gasping for breath. He felt like he had just woken up from a nightmare. A terrible one. But there was no way it could be a dream. He had hoped it was a dream, but the memories were too vivid to deny. The warm gaze of Roderick, who never resented his own daughter despite the damage she had caused herself, and the mocking look in Byron's eyes as he watched her die. In her last moments, even Ophelia's tearful face, who had looked at her, came to mind, and it couldn't be a dream. He scanned his surroundings and took deep breaths to calm himself. An old stone wall covered in moss. Spartan furniture. What is this? She couldn't understand what was happening. Where was she and why wasn't she dead, alone in this unknown place? Or was it really unknown? He fumbled through his memories and this landscape seemed strangely familiar. He had seen this kind of scenery countless times before. In his childhood, wandering with the demon called Byron. It was when. You've woken up, miss. The old wooden door creaked open, revealing a familiar face. It was Laura, her maid. From her early years, when she wandered with Byron, to disguising herself as a lady and entering the Duke's mansion, Laura had cared for her. Although they called her a servant, in reality, Laura had the task of observing her. Hurry up and wash up. Before eating with the master, you must do your morning training. Laura spoke briskly as she placed a container of water she had been holding on a small table next to the bed. But when Ayla looked at Laura, she realized something was wrong. Ayla watched Laura with a growing sense of unease. Laura seemed a little younger than I remembered. Laura must have been in her early 20s, but why did she suddenly look like a late teenager? And the words he used, morning workout? Despite her short 18 years of life, Ayla had dedicated her life to rigorous training. It started at dawn, with basic physical conditioning. He learned to wield a dagger, practiced archery, and hit small targets from a distance. He studied where to hit a realistic human model for a quick kill and mastered poison handling. But all that was before she was 16, before she entered the Duke's mansion. Disguised as a lady, well, not really disguised, now that she thought about it, once she entered the mansion, Laura hadn't woken her up for morning training. Well, revenge against Roderick had been his only purpose in life. From time to time he had done some secret strength exercises in his room, fearing that his skills would become rusty, but that was it. Why are you looking like that? You need to wash and change clothes quickly. Laura spoke sharply, as if she herself were the owner of the house, and then left the room. Left alone, Ayla was lost in thought as she watched Laura's retreating figure. It was as if he had gone back in time to his childhood. An absurd thought, right? But it felt like. He examined his hands. They were small and childish, almost as if they belonged to a girl. Since there was no mirror in the room, he glanced at his reflection in the sink Laura had left behind. The face staring back at him appeared to be that of a girl, around 12 or 13 years old at most. It's incredible. There was no way. It feels like I have. She hesitated, then took a deep breath and whispered to herself, did I travel back in time to when I was a child? The event scheduled for the next day was of great importance to the Weishafen Duchy. It was a grand celebration marking the 18th birthday of Ayla, their lost daughter, and the official announcement of her as heir. To prepare for this great event, workers were urgently brought in from outside, and messengers from various corners of the Palace Empire traveled tirelessly to the mansion, delivering birthday gifts to the young girl. No matter how tight the security was, there were bound to be gaps, and Byron had taken advantage of this opportunity. However, the face reflected in the sink looked nothing like that of an 18-year-old girl about to enter adulthood. Ayla seemed hypnotized by her own face. It was an extremely disconcerting scenario. Have I returned? Could it be that time had gone backwards, returning to my childhood? She knew it was impossible. Time was an immutable force of nature, it couldn't be reversed. However, no matter how he thought about it, all the evidence pointed in that direction. Laura treated her as if nothing had happened, her face, her hands, everything had been rejuvenated. All this was impossible without time going backwards. Somehow, this seemed like an opportunity granted by fate. A chance to get revenge on the man who had deceived her, used her and then discarded her, the man who had manipulated her entire existence. Mother, father. It had only been 2 years, a short time, but during that time her adoptive parents had loved her more warmly than anyone else. A chance to reunite with Roderick and Ophelia. Even the love between her and her adoptive parents, something that had shaken even her, the foolish girl who had lived solely to get revenge on Byron. At first, she had ridiculed his stupidity. She had seen them giving their all, not knowing that she was the assassin sent to claim the Duke's life. But as time passed, he felt guilty and hesitant. Was Roderick really the villain who deserved death? These thoughts began to torment her. Whenever such doubts arose, Laura, who had never left his side, would murmur like a brainwashing chant, "Don't forget what that evil man did to my father." In retrospect, the fool could have been her all along. Unable to recognize her real parents even when they were right in front of her, playing into the devil's hands and even killing her own father, she had been a fool beyond compare. Ayla's tears fell into the quiet sink, leaving ripples. Why hadn't he recognized them? Ayla sighed as she looked at her reflection in the sink. Back then, when Byron cheated on her, she hadn't even suspected it. But now, looking at herself, Ayla couldn't deny that she was undoubtedly Roderick and Ophelia's biological daughter. She looked a lot like them. His distinctive eyes, his robust nose, and even his ocean-colored irises, which seemed cold at first glance but actually contained warmth, were like Roderick's. Her overall facial structure, small lips, and hair with a touch of silver seemed to be a perfect match for Ophelia. Father. As the last image of Roderick, looking at her with affection even as he lay dying, resurfaced in her mind, tears welled in Ayla's eyes once more. To think that he had killed such a person with his own hands. Ayla lowered her hands, which still had no trace of Roderick's blood on them. The blood that will stain these hands will now belong to that devil,